At a crowded airport on an ordinary day, chaos erupted in an instant. A pregnant woman, pale, sweating, breath short, collapsed in panic just as a massive metal utility cart came crashing through the glass from above. It should have been fatal, but it wasn't, because in that moment, a battle-scarred German shepherd named Bear made a choice no human could have made. He moved faster than thought, knocking her out of harm's way and taking the full brunt of the impact himself. What no one realized in that moment was this: Bear wasn't just reacting. He had sensed something no machine, no scanner, no doctor could detect. Something hidden inside the woman's body. A silent crisis. A threat that could have claimed 2 lives before a single heartbeat was missed. Why did Bear single her out? Why did he disobey his handler's commands for the first time in years? Why did he, a trained explosives dog, ignore everything he'd ever learned to protect one stranger? The answer wasn't clear. Not to the agents watching, not even to his partner, but it would be. And when the truth finally came out, it left everyone speechless. This isn't just a rescue story. This is a story of instinct and mystery, of grief, redemption, and the kind of loyalty only a dying dog could carry. A story that begins not with a miracle, but with blood. And that's where we start. 3 hours later, in a silent hospital restroom, under buzzing fluorescent lights, where Daniel Hayes stands alone, scrubbing blood off his hands like it's soaked in gasoline. Lauren Carter, the pregnant woman Bear had saved, is in surgery. Her unborn baby clings to life. Bear lies bleeding in another room, his chest rising shallowly, his fur matted with red. And Daniel, he can't stop scrubbing, because that blood, that moment, it won't leave him. The blood wouldn't come off. No matter how hard Daniel Hayes scrubbed, it clung to his skin like a memory that refused to fade. The water ran pink, circling the porcelain sink in ghostly spirals before disappearing down the drain, like it hadn't just carried pieces of someone's life away. His palms were raw, red from friction, stinging from overwashing, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. He kept scrubbing as if he could erase everything that happened in the last 3 hours. The fluorescent lights above the hospital restroom buzzed quietly, their sterile glow washing over the cracked tile floor and reflecting off the mirror. In that mirror, Daniel barely recognized the man staring back. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw, a uniform streaked with dried blood. His forearms trembled. His face looked like it had aged years in an afternoon. Every breath he took fell shallow, like the air was too thick with guilt and adrenaline to move through his lungs. Behind him, something broke the silence. A soft whine. It was faint, barely audible above the hum of the lights, but it cut through him like a blade. He turned. On the cold linoleum floor lay Bear, his partner, his best friend, his last tie to a world he'd already lost too much of. The broad-shouldered German shepherd was crumpled against the wall, sides heaving in slow, uneven movements. His coat, once thick and golden, was soaked with blood, matted in places. Some of it wasn't his, but most of it was. Daniel dropped to his knees in an instant. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand. His voice cracked, breaking on the edge of panic and pain. He stroked Bear's head gently, fingers tracing the lines of his ears, his muzzle. Bear's amber eyes fluttered open, dull, tired, but they found Daniel's without hesitation. Even now, hurting, bleeding, fading, Bear was watching him. Daniel felt his throat close. He tried to smile, but it faltered. "You're still here," he said softly. "Of course you are." His hand slid down Bear's neck, feeling the warmth under the blood, the slow but steady rise and fall of his chest. "You always stay." Bear didn't whimper, didn't cry. He just blinked once and let out a slow breath. His tail moved, just slightly, just enough. Daniel leaned closer, forehead nearly touching Bear's. His voice dropped to a whisper. You never doubted it, did you? Not for 1 second. You saw what I didn't. You moved. You knew. Images flashed through Daniel's mind. The airport. The panic. The screaming. Lauren Carter. The pregnant woman who'd collapsed at the TSA line. Her confusion. Her fear. And then the crash. The metal cart falling from above, tearing through the glass like a missile. Bear's bark. His lunge. His body slamming into hers, knocking her away. And then the sound. That sickening, heavy sound of metal hitting flesh. Bear had taken the hit without hesitation. No one saw it coming. Not even Daniel. He exhaled shakily and clenched his fists, grounding himself against the cold tile. "You're not allowed to go," he whispered. "Not like this. Not now." The door creaked behind him. Soft footsteps echoed across the room. A nurse entered, her purple scrubs too bright for the heaviness in the air. Her red sneakers squeaked on the tile as she approached, kneeling beside Bear without a word. "He's breathing," she said gently, placing a hand on Bear's ribcage. "But it's shallow. We need to scan him. Check for internal bleeding. He may need surgery." Daniel didn't move, didn't speak. "Was he hit by a vehicle?" she asked. Daniel shook his head slowly. "He saved a woman," he murmured. "At the airport. Took the full impact. Cart dropped from a balcony. Would have crushed her." The nurse paused, her hand still resting gently on Bear's side. Her voice softened. "He's not just your partner, is he?" Daniel swallowed hard, eyes still on Bear's face. "No," he said. "He's family." There it was again. That heaviness. The word he couldn't say without it catching in his throat. Family. Because Bear wasn't just a working dog. He wasn't just a tool or a badge. He was something far more sacred. A promise. A memory. A lifeline. And now, he was slipping away. It had started like any other day at Phoenix Sky Harbor International. Loud, tense, and crawling with impatience. The overhead announcements blended into the cries of overtired children and the steady clack of rolling suitcases against tile. Delays had already begun piling up, and TSA was stretched thin. A security breach on Concourse B had pulled half the agents off the main lines. That left Daniel Hayes alone with Bear, working the K-9 unit solo. A routine assignment that was anything but routine. Bear, always alert, walked at Daniel's side, his steps sharp and sure. His vest clung tightly to his broad frame, clearly marked. TSA K-9, do not pet. But that didn't stop people from staring. Some with admiration, others with unease. Bear had that look. Old battle scars under his fur. A steady gaze that didn't blink at chaos. He wasn't a puppy on parade. He was a soldier. They moved through the long line of anxious passengers at the security checkpoint. Daniel scanned the crowd while Bear sniffed bags and scanned faces. Standard protocol. Nothing seemed off. Until it did. Bear stopped. It wasn't his usual stop and sniff. This was different. His ears twitched. His body stiffened. His nose rose slightly into the air. Daniel felt the leash go taut. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, following Bear's line of sight. There, near the middle of the line, stood a woman, early 30s maybe. Long brown hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, one hand pressed against the lower curve of her belly. She was pregnant, very pregnant. Sweat beaded at her temples. Her other hand trembled as it held her boarding pass. Her lips moved like she was whispering something to herself, but no sound came out. Bear growled, quiet but deep. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Lauren Carter," he murmured, reading her name off the visible ID tag clipped to her carry-on. She was just another traveler, on paper. But Bear had locked on like she was holding something explosive. He gave a low bark and began circling her. Not aggressive, not quite, but urgent, purposeful. She froze. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Daniel asked, stepping forward carefully, hand on Bear's harness. Lauren looked up, eyes wide and unfocused. Is he going to bite me? No, Daniel said quickly. He's trained, but he's trying to tell me something. I'm fine, she said sharply. But her voice cracked. Bear nudged her leg, then nudged again, then barked. People in the line started turning. A child began crying. One of the TSA agents looked up from across the room. Step back, someone shouted. And that's when Lauren screamed. It was raw, sharp, panicked, primal. She turned to run, but her legs gave out. She collapsed right there at the checkpoint, her bag toppling with her. Bear didn't move. He stood over her like a sentinel, barking. Not aggressively, but forcefully, urgently. Daniel moved to her side just as other agents rushed in. She's having a panic attack, one of them said. Another muttered something about overreaction, about the dog being too aggressive. But Daniel knew better. Bear wasn't reacting out of confusion or nerves. He was sensing something. Something buried. Something wrong. And then it happened. A sound, sharp, metallic, cut through the terminal. Heads turned upward. A utility cart, unlatched from the service level above, had broken free. It crashed through a panel of the glass railing and came tumbling down toward the checkpoint like a falling star. Time slowed. Bear barked once, a deep, earth-rattling sound, and launched forward. He shoved Lauren aside, his body slamming into hers like a linebacker. She hit the floor, rolling. The cart struck seconds later. It crashed into Bear with a sound that silenced everything. For a long second, no one moved. Then came the screams. Daniel's breath caught as he sprinted forward, heart thundering. The cart lay on its side, wheels spinning slowly. Glass shards glittered across the floor. Lauren was conscious, curled up and gasping. But Bear wasn't moving. Daniel dropped beside him, his training fighting with the panic rising in his throat. Bear's body was still, twisted unnaturally. Blood seeped beneath him, a slow, terrifying pool. Daniel pressed his hand to Bear's side. There was a heartbeat, but faint, too faint. Sirens howled in the distance. Medics shouted. The airport blurred into chaos. And through it all, Daniel held Bear close, whispering one name in his ear, over and over again. Caleb. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and unanswered questions. Daniel sat pressed between steel walls in the back of the ambulance, Bear's blood soaking through his uniform. The EMTs worked on Lauren beside them, her breathing shallow, hands trembling, her eyes flickering open and shut like a faulty light switch. She was whispering something, over and over, barely audible. The baby, please, the baby. Bear lay on a stretcher just inches from her, unmoving. Tubes ran into his nose. An oxygen mask sat awkwardly over his snout. His chest rose and fell in uneven waves, and each one felt like it might be the last. Daniel kept his hand on Bear's side, whispering words only they would understand. Words Bear had heard when they trained, when they tracked, when they mourned. You stay with me, you hear? I'm not letting you go. But Bear didn't respond. He was there barely, but distant. And Daniel was terrified he was already slipping away. By the time they reached the hospital, everything was moving too fast. Stretchers were unloaded. Doctors shouted orders. Lauren was wheeled down one hall and Bear down another. Daniel stood frozen in the middle of it all, helpless for the first time in years. As a K-9 officer, he was trained for crisis. He'd seen carnage, held dying people in his arms, even pulled bodies from wreckage. But nothing had prepared him for this. He was losing Bear, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. The waiting room smelled like coffee, old magazines, and nerves. He sat in a cold plastic chair, hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees. Every few seconds, He'd look toward the double doors, hoping someone would come through with answers. He tried to focus, tried to think like a professional, but all he could see were Bear's eyes. The moment they closed as the cart hit, the final glance as he saved a woman he didn't even know. Daniel leaned back and rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the dried blood cracking on his knuckles. His fingers brushed something in his coat pocket. Instinctively, he pulled it out. Caleb's old dog tag. It was worn, scratched beyond recognition. A cheap toy from a box of cereal. Daniel remembered. Caleb used to clip it to Bear's collar and call him Commander Bark. Said Bear wasn't just a dog. He was a superhero. That tag had traveled with Bear ever since. Daniel held it tight in his fist now, pressed it to his chest, and closed his eyes. "Don't take him too," he whispered. A nurse approached quietly, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked. He looked up, hollow-eyed. "Yeah, the dog," she said gently, choosing her words like glass on concrete. "He's alive but critical. Vets from emergency care are on their way. There's likely internal bleeding. They'll need to do full scans before surgery." Daniel nodded slowly. "And the woman? Lauren Carter? She's in surgery. OB team is working on an emergency cesarean. The baby's in distress. Placental abruption. The fall might have triggered it." He blinked. "She's going to lose the baby?" "We don't know yet," she said, her voice thin. "But if your dog hadn't knocked her clear when he did, she'd likely be dead. She and the baby both." Daniel stared at her, something heavy pressing down on his chest. "You're saying he saved them?" The nurse nodded. "He moved before anyone saw the danger." He dropped his gaze, overcome. She hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said. "The kind of trauma surgery your dog needs, it's expensive. For animals like him. Large breeds, internal injuries, costs can reach $15,000. Sometimes more." The number hit like a bullet. Daniel exhaled, long and slow. He had $347 in his wallet. A maxed-out credit card. A checking account that was holding its breath for next week's mortgage payment. He'd been barely staying afloat since the divorce. Since Caleb's funeral. Since everything fell apart. He swallowed hard. How long does he have without it? "Maybe hours," the nurse said, then added gently. "I'm sorry." Daniel nodded, but his mind was already spinning. Maybe he could sell the truck. Take out a loan. Maybe the department could help. Though he knew the bureaucracy would take weeks. Weeks Bear didn't have. He sank deeper into the chair, elbows on his knees, eyes burning. Then something shifted. A memory. A voice. "Take care of Bear, Dad. Promise?" Caleb's voice. Clear, innocent, brave. 10 years old, sick in bed, tubes everywhere, but smiling like he was invincible. He loved Bear more than anything. Said Bear knew when he was in pain before the doctors did. Said Bear could feel things. And now Bear had felt something again. Not a bomb. Not a threat. A life. Daniel pressed his palms together and whispered to no one. "I made a promise. I'm not breaking it again." The hallway outside the trauma unit was too quiet, like the building itself was holding its breath. Daniel sat motionless in a metal chair, hands clasped between his knees, his police badge clipped to his belt forgotten. Blood stained his pants and sleeves. Bear's blood. Lauren's blood. He didn't know whose anymore. It didn't matter. It was just red. Whoa, gone. Every second that passed felt like a thief, stealing time Bear didn't have. Somewhere on the other side of those walls, doctors were doing their best to keep him alive. But Daniel could feel the countdown in his bones. Bear had lost so much blood. He hadn't moved when they lifted him from the stretcher. He hadn't opened his eyes again. Daniel clenched his fists and bowed his head, trying to silence the voice in his mind. Caleb's voice. That last night in the hospital. The pale face of a 10-year-old boy fighting a monster no child should face, hooked up to tubes, his eyes wide with pain and hope. Bear had been curled up on that hospital bed, head resting on Caleb's legs, as if he understood everything without a single word. Caleb had looked up at Daniel and whispered, "Take care of him, Dad, even if I can't." And now here Daniel sat, knees shaking, heart crumbling under the weight of failing that promise. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Daniel looked up slowly. A man in a navy suit approached, his face pale and exhausted, the lines under his eyes deepened by fear. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. His hands were clenched at his sides. A hospital visitor badge hung from his jacket. Daniel stood instinctively. The man stopped a few feet away. "Ryan Carter," he said. "Lauren's husband." Daniel nodded slowly. "She's still in surgery." Ryan's voice was tight. "I know. They said, the baby's in distress, that it was close." Daniel looked down. "Yeah." Ryan swallowed. "They told me about your dog." Daniel's gaze flicked back up. "Bear." "Yeah, him." Ryan stepped forward, looking past Daniel toward the trauma doors. "They said he saved her, knocked her out of the way." Daniel nodded once, took the full hit. If he hadn't moved when he did. He stopped, unable to finish. Ryan let out a shaky breath. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said. He didn't do it for thanks. He just knew. There was silence between them, not the uncomfortable kind, but the quiet of shared gravity. Two men standing in the aftermath of chaos, holding their breath for what came next. Ryan's voice cracked. "They said he needs surgery. Something about internal damage. Broken ribs. Bleeding." Daniel nodded. 15 grand. Maybe more. Ryan looked at him. "And you don't have it." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everything about him. The blood-stained clothes, the weary posture, the eyes worn from nights of watching someone fade, told the story already. Ryan reached into his wallet and pulled out a black credit card. "Whatever it costs," he said. "I'll cover it." Daniel blinked. "You don't have to do that." "No," Ryan said, holding the card out. "I do. He saved my wife. He might have saved our daughter. Money's just money. This is life." Daniel stared at the card, but didn't take it. His jaw tightened. "I don't take charity." "This isn't charity," Ryan said. "It's grace. Call it karma. A miracle. Whatever you want. That dog, your dog, made a choice that changed my entire world. Let me return that." Daniel's throat burned. His pride was screaming, but so was the image of Bear, lying in that sterile room waiting, fading. "I'll pay you back," he said quietly. "No," Ryan said firmly. "No payment plans. No IOUs. Just let him live." Daniel took the card with trembling fingers. Before either of them could say more, a woman in light blue scrubs appeared from around the corner. Her face was serious, but her eyes held warmth. "You're Bear's handler?" she asked Daniel. He straightened. "Yes, we're prepping him for surgery now," she said. "He's stable, for the moment, but we need to act fast." Daniel's heart jumped. "He's still breathing?" She nodded. "Barely. But he's a fighter." Daniel followed her as they wheeled Bear past, covered in wires and IVs, his muzzle gray with pain, eyes closed. Daniel leaned in and whispered close to his ear, "Hang on, soldier. We've got work to do." And just for a moment, barely a twitch, Bear's tail moved. Hospitals distort time. Minutes stretch into eternities, while hours vanish in the blink of an eye. The ticking of a wall clock begins to sound more like a countdown than comfort. Daniel sat alone in the waiting room, blood still staining his sleeves, his hands clasped tightly as if holding something together that wanted to break apart. On one side of the building, his dog, his family, was in surgery, fighting for every breath. On the other, a pregnant woman and her unborn child, both strangers just hours ago, were locked in their own life-or-death battle. And somehow, Bear had tied them all together. Daniel hated hospitals, hated the sterile smells, the soft hum of machines, the awful quiet between a doctor's frown and a family's heartbreak. But what he hated most were the memories that crept in when he sat still too long. The last time he'd waited in a hospital like this, the world had ended. His son Caleb had been hooked up to tubes and monitors, grinning despite the pain, trying to joke about green jello and Christmas presents in July. Bear had been there too, curled up beside the bed, sensing things none of the doctors did. That night had been the beginning of the end. The cancer moved faster than anyone expected. Caleb had lasted only 2 more weeks. Daniel gripped the edge of his seat, forcing himself to breathe. The weight of his failure pressed heavy on his chest. Failure to see the signs, failure to save his son, failure to keep his family whole. Bear had taken Caleb's loss like a soldier, quiet, still, never whining. But Daniel knew he grieved too. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, Bear would wake up and stare at the front door like he expected Caleb to walk back through it. A nurse walked by with a clipboard, then disappeared around the corner. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steadily. Somewhere else it stopped. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. He didn't pray. Not really. But in that moment, he spoke aloud to something, someone he wasn't sure was listening. If you're up there, if Caleb's up there, don't let him take Bear. Not yet. Not this way. Footsteps interrupted the silence. Daniel looked up to see Ryan returning. The man's suit was wrinkled now, his tie loosened, his face pale and drawn. He sat next to Daniel without a word. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Ryan spoke, voice quiet. I didn't say thank you. Daniel shook his head. You don't need to. I do, Ryan said. Your dog. He didn't hesitate. He didn't know my wife, or my baby, but he moved. That's Bear, Daniel said. He always moves. Ryan looked straight ahead, his hands folded. They think the baby might make it. They're calling her Emma. Lauren picked the name years ago. Daniel nodded, the name hitting something soft inside him. I thought I'd lose both of them today, Ryan whispered. I still might. Daniel didn't reply. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound hollow. You know, Ryan added, they said your dog sensed the placental abruption before any symptom showed, before even Lauren felt the pain. Like he just knew. Daniel turned toward him. He's done that before. With your son? Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. Caleb. He was 10. Had leukemia. Bear stuck to him like glue. Wouldn't leave his side. Slept in his bed. Sat beside him during chemo. He knew when things were getting worse before the doctors did. Ryan looked over, really seeing Daniel for the first time. So he's more than a dog. Daniel swallowed hard. He's my last promise. The hallway door creaked open. A nurse stepped in, scanning the room. Daniel Hayes? He stood quickly. The nurse offered a tired smile. Bear made it through surgery. It was close. He flatlined once on the table, but we brought him back. He's in recovery now. Critical but stable. Daniel's knees went weak. He gripped the chair in front of him to stay standing. Thank you, he said, his voice catching. He's a fighter, she added. We'll keep monitoring him through the night. You can see him soon. She turned to Ryan next. Dr. Summers will be out shortly with news about your wife and daughter. They both nodded, the air feeling just a little less heavy. Minutes later, another figure entered the room. Dr. Summers, her eyes sharp but kind, her white coat streaked faintly with red. She looked at Ryan first. Lauren is stable, she said. Emergency C-section went as planned. Your daughter is in the NICU. She's tiny, but breathing. Ryan's hand went to his mouth. His shoulders shook. A single tear slid down his cheek. Then Dr. Summers turned to Daniel. "Your dog," she said, "saved both their lives." He sensed the abruption before we had any clinical signs. That kind of instinct, it's beyond science. Daniel couldn't speak. The doctor offered a faint smile. "You should go see him." Moments later, Daniel stood beside Bear's recovery crate, heart pounding. The old shepherd lay beneath a soft blanket, IVs running from his leg. He looked fragile, smaller than before. But when Daniel said his name, just once, Bear's tail thumped softly against the bed. Daniel laughed, tears streaking his face. "Damn mutt," he whispered. "You're not allowed to go yet." And Bear, faithful, broken, brilliant Bear, thumped his tail again. The world outside the hospital had moved on. Planes still took off. Traffic still buzzed across the freeway. Somewhere, someone was complaining about a missed meeting or a cold coffee. But inside Daniel's small hotel room across the street from Phoenix General, time stood still. It was barely sunrise, and the light filtering through the blinds painted long gold streaks across the floor. Daniel sat at the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the envelope in his hand. It had been slipped under his door sometime during the night. The handwriting on the front stopped him cold. Linda, his ex-wife. And inside the larger envelope was a smaller one, sealed with a worn dinosaur sticker. Faded now, peeling slightly at the edges. Caleb's sticker. Caleb's writing. "For Dad. When Bear does something amazing." Daniel's hands trembled. He had almost forgotten about this. Linda had once told him Caleb wrote a letter, just in case. But it had never been given to him. Not after the funeral. Not after the fight. Not after everything fell apart between them. Daniel closed his eyes, pressing the envelope to his chest. He could still remember Caleb in his dinosaur pajamas, curled up on the couch with Bear, asking the kinds of questions no 10-year-old should ask. "If I don't make it, will Bear still be yours? And then, will he still know I love him?" Daniel had promised he would never let Bear forget. Never let Caleb be forgotten. He opened the letter slowly, careful not to tear the fragile paper. Caleb's handwriting was crooked, uneven, clearly written on a day when he felt just strong enough to hold the pen. "Hi, Dad. If you're reading this, then Bear did something amazing again. I told you he would. He always does. You probably think this is a goodbye letter. It's not. It's a keep-going letter." Daniel's breath caught. "I know you'll be sad, but Bear won't let you stay that way. He knows when your heart hurts. He'll keep nudging your hand and sitting on your feet until you laugh again. That's what heroes do. That's what family does." Daniel wiped at his eyes, blinking hard, letting the words soak in. "I know I'm not really your son, not in the way people say, but you were always my dad. And I picked you. And Bear picked you too. Every time he saves someone, it's like we both did it. Me and him. Together. So don't give up. Not ever. Love, Caleb." Daniel folded the letter carefully and held it to his heart. A sob escaped him, quiet and broken. But it wasn't just pain anymore. It was release. Healing. A door cracking open. Bear had done something amazing again. And somehow, through it all, Caleb had been part of it. Later that morning, Daniel returned to the hospital with new weight and new light in his heart. He entered Bear's recovery room quietly. The old shepherd lay on a thick bed, patched up, bandaged, breathing with the help of machines. But his eyes were open now, fully open, watching the door like he'd been waiting. Daniel knelt down beside him and pressed his forehead gently to Bear's. "You knew," he whispered. "You always knew." Bear's tail tapped once. Moments later, there was a soft knock on the door. Daniel turned to see Lauren being wheeled in, her skin pale but glowing with new life. She clutched a bundle in her arms, tiny, fragile, wrapped in pink. Ryan followed close behind, his hand on her shoulder. "Can we?" Lauren asked softly. Daniel nodded, standing aside as they rolled closer. Bear's ears perked slightly at the sound of the baby's whimper. Lauren leaned forward, tears in her eyes. "This is Emma," she said. "The doctors say she wouldn't be here if not for him." She reached out and gently touched Bear's head, her fingers trembling. "Thank you for seeing what no one else saw." Ryan stood behind her, eyes filled with something deeper than gratitude. "You saved us," he whispered to Bear. "All of us." Daniel stepped back, watching the moment unfold. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He looked down at Bear. "Caleb said every time you save someone, it's like a piece of him does too." Bear's eyes blinked slowly, as if he understood every word. And in that moment, Daniel realized something. Bear wasn't just holding on for him anymore. He was holding on for all of them. Morning came with the kind of quiet only hospitals understand. Sterile, slow, almost reverent. Daniel sat in the small guest room across the street from Phoenix General, barely having slept. The previous day had stretched his soul thin, and he wore exhaustion like armor. His clothes were still stained from the blood, Lauren's and Bear's, and his mind spun in loops of guilt, hope, and memories he had locked away for too long. Then he saw it. An envelope on the floor, slipped under his door while he slept. He blinked at the familiar handwriting. Linda. He hadn't spoken to her in months. Not since the anniversary of Caleb's death, when their brief phone call dissolved into silence and unspoken pain. He reached down and picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than paper had any right to. Inside it was another envelope, smaller, soft, childishly sealed with a faded dinosaur sticker. And on it, in crooked letters that almost brought him to his knees, were the words, "For Dad, when Bear does something amazing." Daniel stared at the sticker for a long time. He didn't open it right away. He couldn't. His fingers traced the handwriting. The shaky loops of a 10-year-old who believed in heroes, in second chances, and in a dog who could save the world. This was the letter Linda had told him about once. But she hadn't sent it. Not until now. Inside the larger envelope was also a short note from Linda. "I heard what Bear did. The woman. The baby. The news is everywhere. I should have given this to you after Caleb's funeral. But I was angry. Angry at you, at life, at everything. But now I think Bear saving that family is Caleb's way of saying it's time to let go. I hope this letter helps. He loved you, even if we couldn't say it enough." Daniel pressed the envelope to his chest. For a few seconds, he just sat there, fighting back the flood rising in his chest. Then he carefully peeled the sticker and opened the letter. The paper was wrinkled, the ink smudged in places, but the words hit like a prayer spoken straight from a child's heart. "Hi, Dad. If you're reading this, Bear did something amazing. I told you he would. He always does. You probably think this is a goodbye letter, but it's not. It's a keep-going letter." Daniel's throat closed up. "I know you'll be sad, but Bear won't let you stay that way. He'll keep nudging your hand and licking your arm until you laugh again. That's what he does. That's what heroes do. He's your dog, but he's also mine. And that means part of me is still here. Every time he saves someone, it's like I'm helping too." Tears streamed down Daniel's cheeks as he continued reading. "I know I wasn't really your kid. Not from the beginning. But you were my dad. Always. And I picked you. And Bear picked you too. Don't forget that." The words were small, but they filled the room. "So don't give up. Not ever. Even when it's hard. Love, Caleb." Daniel folded the letter slowly, like it was made of glass. He held it in his hands for a long time, his eyes closed. A decade of grief broke open in a wave of healing. Caleb had forgiven him. Caleb had believed in him. In Bear. In love that never dies. Later that morning, Daniel returned to the hospital. The staff greeted him differently now. Kind eyes, gentle smiles. Bear had become something more than just a patient. He was a symbol now. A story spreading across waiting rooms, whispered between nurses, admired by surgeons. The dog that knew. The dog that saved 2 lives. When Daniel walked into the recovery room, Bear was awake. His eyes opened the moment Daniel said his name. His tail, still stiff with IVs and tape, thumped gently against the blankets. Daniel knelt beside the bed and rested his forehead against Bear's. "You knew," he whispered. "You always know." Bear blinked slowly, as if confirming it. A knock came at the door. Daniel turned and found Lauren being wheeled into the room, her hospital gown loose, her face pale but radiant. In her arms was a pink-wrapped bundle barely larger than a football. Behind her stood Ryan, silent, hands in his pockets, his eyes soft. "Can we?" Lauren asked. Daniel stepped aside, nodding. As she rolled closer, Bear's ears perked slightly. The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Bear blinked at her with quiet focus. "This is Emma," Lauren said gently. "Because of him, she's breathing. We all are." Her hand trembled as she reached out and touched Bear's scarred head. Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saw what no one else saw." Ryan moved beside her and crouched down. "You didn't know us, but you moved. No hesitation, no fear, just loyalty." Daniel sat down beside them all, watching the moment unfold. "I used to think Bear was just a working dog," he said quietly. "But I was wrong. He's the part of us that still hopes, that still saves, even when no one's watching." And in that moment, as Bear's tail tapped again, Daniel understood. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. A year later, Daniel's backyard looked nothing like it did before. Gone were the overgrown weeds, the broken fence post, and the silence that used to cling to the air like fog. Today, the lawn was alive with the sounds of joy, laughter, music, and the occasional bark from a now-graying German shepherd lying proudly beneath the shade of a cherry tree. Pink balloons danced in the warm breeze, tied to wooden stakes and folding chairs. A hand-painted sign read, "Happy first birthday, Emma." It felt surreal. Children ran barefoot in the grass, chasing bubbles. Friends and family gathered around picnic tables layered with homemade food. Lauren, radiant in a soft summer dress, held Emma in her lap. Now a chubby-cheeked toddler with bright eyes and a laugh that made everyone else laugh with her. Ryan stood beside them, his hands resting protectively on their shoulders, his suit traded for a cotton shirt and sandals. And in the middle of it all, quiet, noble, watchful, was Bear. His fur was peppered with gray now. The old battle scars on his ribs still showed through in places where the fur hadn't fully grown back. But he was strong, alive. Oh, and if anyone questioned whether he understood that this gathering was partly in his honor, the gentle wag of his tail as each guest greeted him left no doubt. Daniel stood at the edge of the yard, holding a lemonade in one hand and Caleb's letter in the other. He had read it countless times over the past year, memorized every word, folded it with care, and placed it in his wallet, where he could always feel it close. On especially hard days, he would take it out and read it again, reminded that his son still walked beside him in every life Bear touched. Lauren came to stand beside him now, Emma balanced on her hip. "She still gets quiet around him," she said softly. "It's like she knows, like she remembers." "She does," Daniel said. "In her bones, maybe. In her heartbeat." Lauren smiled. "And Bear? He watches her like she's made of stars." Daniel chuckled. "To him she is." A few feet away, Ryan raised a toast. "To Bear," he said, lifting his glass. "To a dog who saved 2 lives change 5 more, and prove that sometimes the right soul walks on 4 legs instead of 2. The crowd raised their cups, clapped, laughed. Bear barked once, tail wagging with approval. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft orange, Daniel sat beside Bear under the tree. Emma toddled over with a balloon string tangled around her wrist and plopped down between them. Bear didn't move, just licked her cheek gently. She giggled, holding tightly to his ear like it was a lifeline. From the patio, Lauren announced that she was expecting again, twin boys. The news brought cheers, hugs, and happy tears. She said their names would be Thomas and Brian, one named after her grandfather, the other named after a hero with paws. Erica arrived just as the lights came on. Lauren's cousin, a TSA officer herself, and sister to a fallen hero named Kaiser, a K-9 who had died in service. She brought with her a small medal and collar tag that had once belonged to Kaiser. She kneeled beside Bear and clipped it gently to his collar. "For you, old boy," she whispered. From one legend to another, Daniel watched all of this, holding back the tears that had become familiar companions. Not of grief anymore, but of gratitude. As the sky turned to dusk, Daniel played a video on his phone. Caleb's last Christmas, Bear curled beside him, wrapping paper everywhere, Caleb grinning wide as he hugged his dog tight. "You were right, kiddo," Daniel whispered, eyes on Bear. "It is amazing." Bear let out a long breath and rested his head against Daniel's knee, tail brushing once in the grass. They sat there in silence, man and dog, boy and legacy, until the last balloon drifted gently into the night sky, rising toward the stars. 3 months after Emma's birthday, Daniel stood behind a podium at the Phoenix K-9 Academy, dressed in full uniform, though his hat rested beside him. The auditorium was quiet, filled with recruits, officers, and families of working dogs. A giant photo of Bear hung behind him, nose slightly scarred, eyes wise and watchful. The banner above read, K-9 Bear Valor Award Ceremony, honoring service beyond duty. Bear lay nearby, his coat brushed and collar polished. He no longer sprinted like before, but he still stood tall when it mattered. His ears flicked at every name called, every cheer, every whistle from younger dogs. But he only moved when Daniel stepped away from the microphone and knelt beside him. Daniel clipped a medal to Bear's collar, one etched with his name and the words, "He saved so others could live." Tears shimmered in the eyes of everyone who knew the story. From that day on, the Academy launched a new initiative, the Bear Protocol, a training module that focused not only on scent and behavior detection, but on intuition, empathy, and nonverbal cues often dismissed by traditional training. Bear's instinctive detection of Lauren's medical emergency before it happened had changed how officers approached gut feeling. What was once just a bark now meant something more. Bear had rewritten the handbook. News channels ran segments on the awards ceremony. Photos of Bear with Emma went viral. A journalist wrote an op-ed calling him the dog that listened when no one else did. Comments poured in, thousands of people sharing their own stories of dogs who had saved them, emotionally, physically, or spiritually. The channel Daniel had once made to document Caleb's journey, long dormant, now buzzed with life. It had been renamed K-9 Miracle Stories. The first video posted was Bear's story, edited with hospital footage, Emma's birthday, and Caleb's final letter. It reached 1 million views within weeks. Comments overflowed with love. "My dog knew I was pregnant before I did. My husky lay across my chest the night I tried to end it. She wouldn't let me go. Dogs don't speak. They save." Daniel read each one, humbled. One evening, as Daniel sat outside under the Arizona stars, Emma sleeping beside Bear on a picnic blanket, Lauren walked out with a laptop in hand. "You've got mail," she said with a smile. "And not the spam kind." Daniel clicked it open. The email was from a military base in Texas. "We've read about Bear. We'd like your permission to use his story as required reading in our new PTSD companion dog unit. We believe his example can teach soldiers how to trust again." Daniel sat back, stunned. Not long after, Bear's story became part of TED Talks, classrooms, and even children's books. One titled Bear and the Baby Who Laughed. Caleb's name was mentioned in the acknowledgments. Because Bear had never just been a hero. He had been Caleb's hero too. And now he was the world's. As Bear aged, Daniel built a small sanctuary behind his house. A peaceful place for retired K9s, funded by donations from the community. The entrance bore a single engraved quote, "Not all angels have wings. Some walk beside us with 4 paws." Bear lived another 3 years. Quiet, steady, love. On the day he passed, the sky was soft with rain. Daniel held him close, wrapped in the same blanket Caleb once used. Bear's eyes met his one final time. No fear, only peace. Daniel buried him beneath the cherry tree. Above it, a carved stone read, "Bear, the dog who waited, the dog who saved." Each spring, the tree bloomed early. Emma always said it was Bear saying hello. Underscore. Some say a dog's life is too short. But maybe it's because their work gets done faster than ours ever could. Bear didn't just save lives. He changed the way we see them. His story isn't over. It lives in every child protected, every officer trained, every family brought back from the edge. If you've ever been saved by a dog, physically or emotionally, tell us in the comments. Let your story be the next spark of hope. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it. Someone out there needs to believe that even in our darkest moments, a paw might reach out. Because sometimes, it's not a person who saves us. It's a dog.